All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. This is being recorded as we had lots of participants say we really want this information. However, I have a time conflict. So we are going to record this. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to be here to share information for you all relating to the ISATs, most specifically for school leaders. Um, Please note that this is a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. So just be mindful of your audio. We do have some co-hosts who will just be checking to make sure that we're remaining muted so we're not disturbing anyone else. There will be chances at the end to come off and ask your questions. This will be recorded, as I said. Afterwards, we will work on making the presentation, an audio recording, and a question and answer document available. Once they are accessible, we will send that out so you have that as a reference. Um, as we're going through, please put questions in the chat. Like I said, I am going to wait till the end to answer them. So we want to make sure we have all the time to get through this great information. And so please put them in the chat. There will be question and answers at the end. If I'm unable to get to every question in the moment here today, I will create a question and answer document and share that out. So if your question doesn't get answered today, please know that I will take the time to answer it and get you that response. Okay, so a little bit about myself. There are plenty of other Idaho Department of Education staff on this call that you may see their backgrounds, so you know who they are. I am our lead presenter. My name is Austin Ambrose, and I am the ISAT coordinator. I joined the department last summer. I came from a background of working in elementary schools as a teacher. Then I was a dean of students for a K-10 school that was still growing at the time. And then I was an elementary director slash principal for a couple years. And so when I moved into this role at the Department of Education, I have gotten a chance to learn at a new level, and I realized how much information I didn't know as a school leader. And so I really wanted to prioritize the great work that you all do and give you some information that I wish I would have known as a school leader. And so that's really what kind of brought about this presentation and what I hope to provide, not just today, but just moving forward. I really want to create more intentional opportunities to connect with school and district leaders who are closely connected to this information. And so that's what we're going to work on today. If you are able to throw in the chat, just like elementary, middle, high school, would love to just get a quick gauge of like where are we at? Who's here with us today? Or if you're in another role, if you oversee a district level position or such, go ahead and throw that in there as well. You could just say district or whatever makes the most sense for kind of your connection to the K-12 system. Um, awesome. This is so great. I'm seeing a range of K-12, middle, really all over the board, and that is fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I know how critical time is in schools, and so I really appreciate you being here today. Our objectives for this short hour together, we're going to cover a broad overview of the ISAT summative assessment. We're going to talk about intentional use of the summative data. We're going to talk a moment about the RFP, which is the response for proposal process that will influence the ISAT moving forward. And then again, a chance to answer questions. And so I'm really excited to dig in with you all today. We always start presentations around assessment and ISAT around the importance and the purpose of all educational assessments, not just the ISAT. This is a non-exhaustive list of different purposes for educational assessments. We all know that there's different types of assessments that we use to support student learning, to support evaluations of systems. And again, this is just some of the things that we use assessments to support our work in schools. When we talk about the summative ISAT, we're actually looking at that very top bullet point. The summative ISAT is designed to evaluate systems, programs, or curriculum and resources. It is not designed for the individual student. That's not its intent. And we're going to talk more about that later on, but I always want to make that very clear. When we're talking about the summative ISAT that they take once a year, that's because it's designed to look at systems level work. Systems could be a school level, it could be a district level, it could be a state level, but it's not designed to look at an individual student. And we're going to get into more of that here in just a moment. Just providing this general background that I'm sure as educators we are all aware, right? This is where the need for these summative assessments come from. It is to ensure equity of instruction and academic expectations for all students. So we have our Idaho content standards that we are hoping all of our students will learn, and these assessments are how we know if they have learned that content. So just a little bit about what a standardized assessment means, what it is and why we have them. So when we refer to a standardized assessment, we're actually referring more to the standardized procedures to ensure consistency across administration, not necessarily talking about the academic content standards, right? But that word standardized does create a little bit of that confusion. That's a part of it, but it's also that part around that consistency across test environment. We're making this assessment as standardized as possible in all aspects to ensure consistency of results so we can have valid inferences from the data we get. And so there are federal policies and Idaho policies that support this and bring that coherence with our educational system to support student learning. They focus on the need to have those same expectations driving both assessment and curriculum and instruction. And then the use of standardized assessments help us to evaluate and inform this coherence. So this is kind of a little bit broad of what they are and why we have them. As I mentioned, that standardized process, right? We need to ensure that we keep these procedures as standardized as possible across the board because it creates the conditions that allows us to get valid results. So the inferences we make can be valid and meaningful and accurate and are appropriate for their intended use. And so that's why it's important that the role of security in tests, right? All of these are part of that standardized process. And again, it's leading to us being able to have the results mean what we need it to mean. So again, ensuring valid results. By having these valid results, it allows our students, our families, our educators, everyone who's a part of our educational system to make decisions regarding the effectiveness of programs and systems, the impact of our curriculum and our instruction, and potentially our decisions around the allocation of resources, right? Without having valid results, we're not able to make informed decisions based on the inferences we get from these assessments. So that's just a general overview we always get. Now we're going to dive into this idea around connecting our standards, the curriculums that we use in our schools with our assessments. Right, so we have our Idaho content standards. These are what we want students to know, right? And this is led by our fabulous content and curriculum team, some of which have joined us today and they're in the audience. And we appreciate all the work that they do in going through that process of adopting our Idaho content standards. That's what drives our assessments, right? The standards come first. The assessments are measuring how will we know what the students have learned. And so that's where our state assessment systems, such as the ISATs, come from. They are driven by what is decided in those Idaho content standards. It's not vice versa. There are alignment studies and everything that go into our assessments to ensure that they are measuring our Idaho content standards. And so we always want to make it really clear that these are working in tandem, and that's why our two teams work very closely here at the department because we support each other's work. We have to know our standards in order to understand how they're being assessed. The assessment helps us to inform our instruction around the standards, right? So it's a cycle. But the standards do drive the creation of our assessments. Here at the Idaho Department of Education, the assessment and accountability team has been doing a lot of work around what does it mean to have a balanced assessment system. We really believe that there is a whole system that goes into supporting all aspects of our education, and most specifically our students, right? That's why we do this work. It's because we want our students to learn and be able to take the paths that they want when they reach adulthood. And so a balanced assessment system allows us to look at the various types of assessments that we use. If we go back to that earlier slide about the purpose, right? There's a lot of different reasons we use assessment, and there are different kinds of assessments that achieve those purposes. And so this graphic is meant to show some of the various types of assessments that we use. And right now we're working on the scale of these, but the idea is we want to show kind of the weight various assessments might play in a balanced assessment system. Notice that formative assessment practices is a huge chunk of this. Those are the daily things that teachers are doing to support student learning. They are the most impactful and the most direct that you can have in supporting student learning. And we want to prioritize that. They should not be underemphasized. They need the attention they deserve. So the work that your teachers do every single day, of course, we know it matters, but it matters when we talk about these balanced assessment systems. These other types of assessments are meant to help support their understanding of what they need to do in those formative assessment practices to continue to gather evidence of student learning. And that's exactly what formative assessment practices are. They're evidence of student learning. They don't have to be one way. They don't have to look like an exit ticket that a student fills out and turns in. It could be a discussion. It could be a KWL chart. It is all of the different ways that you, as an educator, as a teacher, are gathering evidence of what students know. And so we really want to almost overemphasize the importance of those as part of this broader system. And so the summative is just a small piece of that. It's an important piece. We have to have all of these pieces to support our students. And we want to make it, and we are just focusing on the summative today because that's what the ISAT is. It is our summative assessment. This is a very general overview, and I think I thought I changed it. It should say state assessment design. Right. So as I mentioned, we start with our standards adoption led by the content and curriculum team. This occurs about every 6 years or so, and it has input from a lot of different aspects of our education system, such as our Idaho educators. They are a part of this adoption process, and then it is board approved and they become our Idaho content standards once they've gone through that approval process. From there, we have vendors who do the item development, right? They work on ensuring alignment from the items they provide to the standards that we have adopted. Sometimes we have to fill gaps. That vendor might not have a direct connection to some of our standards, so they create new items to help fill those gaps to ensure that we are covering the breadth and depth of our content standards, because that's what the summative assessment is intended to do. Oh, some of my slides, I apologize, automatically do that, and I don't know why. So I apologize. Um, and so our item vendors will fill those gaps because we need to cover the breadth and depth of our standards. These go through many different rounds of review, field testing, data validation. There's a lot of things that go into item development before a student would ever have that count towards their scoring of an assessment. And once they've gone through all of those processes, then we get to operationalized items, which means they are now able to be used for scoring purposes because they have been proven to measure what it's supposed to measure. They have proven alignment. They have been tested for bias and sensitivity, right? They have done all of those things to ensure that this is the inferences that we can make from the data is valid. And so they have to follow those standardized procedures. And again, they allow us to have inferences that are valid, and they are reliable in what they measure. And so when we talk about connecting these standards, so we talk about these Idaho content standards a lot. Those, again, are state adopted. So we have standards, though, more broadly, right? Each state has their own. There is the Common Core standards that could have been adopted across the country. So when I talk about standards, sometimes we are talking more general. But then sometimes we are mentioning our specific Idaho content standards. These various groups of standards informs things differently. When we talk about the more broad standards, whether they're another state, maybe it's the Common Core, those various groups of standards often inform curriculum development and potentially our instruction because we often use our curriculum to help inform our instruction. Those are not always Idaho aligned because while we do have similarities between the Idaho content standards and other standards across the country, they're not always a one-to-one correspondence. Again, apologies, something was clicked and it just automatically does it. And so when you think about your curriculum, that is locally adopted. Again, our content and curricula team, great. They vet curriculum. One of the things they look at is their alignment to our Idaho content standards. So if they make it onto their adoption guide list, those have been vetted and are aligned with our Idaho content standards. Curriculums don't always have that, and you at the local level don't always have to choose from that list. So you might choose a curriculum that is a good fit for your community, but it might not have been vetted in a way that it shows that alignment to our state standards. And then our state standards are informing those statewide assessments. So if you're choosing a curriculum that doesn't have that direct connection, and then you're trying to have it line up with the statewide assessments, there's a disconnect. And so we always want to make it clear that these bottom two, our curriculum and our assessments, are supposed to support one another. You might need to do a little bit of intentional work around seeing that overlap because it's not always exactly how you want it to be because they're not informed always by the same standards. And so that's just something we always like to call out is we don't have a statewide curriculum. You all choose which ones you want to use, and that doesn't ensure that they're going to be aligned with the assessments that your students are required to take based on Idaho content standards. These are a couple examples of how a standard could look different from the curriculum you're using and then to the assessment that students are asked to take. And the reason I show this is not to say that a curriculum is bad or that you shouldn't be using the tasks in curriculum. What the intent here is to show that that same standard could be shown differently, that there are different ways that a student might engage with the content and thinking around that standard. And it's just to show that we as educators need to be aware that there is more than one way a student's going to need to engage with the standard. And by being aware, we can better support them in giving them a variety of interactions. And so this standard is a sixth grade math standard around ratios. If you read the standard, if you read that curricular task, and if you read that assessment item, it's asking them to have the same knowledge to complete that. But how they're engaging with it does look quite different. For ELA, again, this is a fourth grade reading comprehension. The curricular task is asking a very similar type of question as the assessment item, but how students are engaging looks really different. So again, we have to use those two to support one another. We can have them practice with curricular tasks and assessment items, and then be able to see, is there a format that they're struggling in? How can I help them better be flexible with their thinking around this knowledge? And again, this is just to show that there is multiple ways that a standard could be measured. And we need to be aware of that so we can support our students in their learning and flexible thinking around that skill or content. We're going to talk a little bit about the summative assessment structure. I do want to note I had a science example that didn't make it into the slideshow, but I will add it for when we send this out. So there will be an example for science as well. So our ISAT summative assessment is broken into these broad categories. In math and ELA, we call those claims. In science, they're referred to as our domains. With each of those, there are 4 of these broad buckets. So in ELA, we have our reading, our writing, speaking and listening, and research, right? So all of our targets, all of our standards are then organized within those. And these, again, are just our broad ideas that we can gather student data on. And this is the most granular level that a student's reports show up is at the claim level, which is not very granular. These are big ideas that cover a lot of concepts. So taking that further, this is a graphic to show you the various levels and the more granular data we get based on the design of the summative assessment. So we start broad with a grade level, then we have a content area, we have those claims that you just saw. Within our claims, they are made up of a series of targets. Targets are a combination of related standards. So we often hear, well, the test isn't aligned to standards. It is, it's just not aligned directly to the standard. Like you don't get data directly to the standard because for us to get enough data to be able to speak to a direct standard, the assessment would have to be much, much longer than it currently is to have enough items that give us enough information to report at a standards level. And so to give us a slightly more granular view, we have targets because they are related standards. And so this is a 7th grade math example, right? All of those 3 standards have to do with analyzing proportional relationships. So while I might not know the exact standard, I am able to say, hey, target A is connected to these standards, and they all have to do with this idea. So we are able to get some granular data, but again, that is not the ultimate purpose to look at individual students and how they're doing. Our goal is to look at systems level. So it could be really helpful for me as a seventh grade math teacher to say, oh, my students are struggling with target A, which has to do with proportional relationships. That just informs my decision making moving forward around that particular concept, not around individual students. The other side just shows an example for science since the language is a little different. We have grade 5, we have science. The domain is earth and space science. Then we have disciplinary core ideas. So within those domains, there are more specific DCIs. Within those DCIs, we do then get, again, those individual standards that make up that broad DCI. Again, the level we see data at is just to the DCI level. We do not get to the standards level. And I always like to remind everyone that the standards that make up a DCI are from all of the grade band, right? So for a fifth grade student, those DCIs are made up of third, fourth, and fifth grade standards. So if we are not covering those earlier standards, if we only are really focusing on the fifth grade standards, our students are not going to be able to perform as well because there is content related to third and fourth grade standards. This is just another graphic to kind of show the broad idea here where we have a subject that are grouped into claims. Within those claims, we have a various number of targets, and those targets are made up of related standards. Another really helpful tool as you're starting to think about the structure of the ISATs are our blueprints. This shows you what targets are going to be seen, how many items related to those targets. And in math, they go as far as even showing you the priority targets to some supporting targets. And we'll get to an example of what that looks like here in just a moment. But the blueprints are really good at helping to identify those priority targets. There is a slide that is not going to be shown, but if you are unsure how to access these, there's a slide to show you where to go to find the blueprints. But you will see an example here on the next slide. So we're looking at a grade 5 math blueprint. You can see that we have our claim 1, which is the main claim in math that we are able to get to these target levels. The other claims are still scored, but we don't get enough items to be able to narrow down to a more specific level of data. So claim 1 in math is where we see the level of targets. It is broken into two types of targets, our priority clusters and our supporting clusters. When looking at a priority cluster, targets E and I, if I look all the way almost to the far right side where it says items and my cat, it is saying that there are 3 items that will connect to those 2 standards. So they might have 2 for target E, they might have 1 for I, vice versa, but there's going to be a total of 3 items that connect to those 2 targets. So I know that these are going to be important for my students to cover because they're going to see a number of items related to them. However, when I look at my supporting clusters, we still need these standards. They're either building on previous knowledge or they're preparing for future knowledge, but they might not need as much attention in this given year. And so they become supporting clusters. So targets A, B, G, and H, for all 4 of those targets, a student is only going to see 1 item, not 1 per target, but 1 that connects to 1 of those 4 targets. And so this is why also the summative assessment is great for systems level. Not every student is going to see every target. And so we can't say whether every student knows analyzing patterns and relationships because not every student is going to see target B on the assessment. When we look at a classroom, a school, a district, that's when we can start to see how students are doing as it relates to those supporting clusters more broadly. A rule of thumb that I have been told that I think is a great rule of thumb is priority clusters should be about 75% of your instructional time and supporting clusters should be about 25%. That's not like a hard and fast rule. That is just anecdotally something that I had been told that I think really just helps you in framing your thinking around how much time should I be dedicating to my priority versus my supporting. And a lot of times, these supporting clusters can be integrated into your priority cluster. So if you're thinking about instructionally, how am I going to fit this all in? A lot of times, those supporting clusters fit really nicely with a priority cluster, so you can still cover it without it being the main focus. This is another view, again, just calling out science specifically around how we have multiple grade levels making up those disciplinary core ideas. So again, this is third and fourth grade showing how they connect to grade five disciplinary core ideas. So that's the structure, right? So we talked a little bit about our broad thinking around assessments and how they support student learning. We looked at that one piece of that broad picture of the summative structure. Now we're going to get into the data that are currently provided to you all as it relates to the ISAT system. So this is our target level report. So we talked about our targets a lot. We've been hearing it a lot, but this is what it looks like to see a target level report. If you've seen this before, fantastic. If you haven't seen it before, it is in our reporting system in Tide. We lovingly refer to it as the Lucky Charms report because there's a lot of different symbols, which we are working on adjusting. So there's a note there about that in just a moment. But there are a lot of symbols, and so we're going to take a moment to just help you understand what these symbols mean and how could they help you in moving forward when looking at your summative data. So just briefly, why do these matter, right? They provide detailed and actionable data on student targets as it relates to their proficiency in areas of strength or weakness. And this can be looked at different levels. So we could look at a classroom level if there's enough students in that classroom. We could look at a school level. We could look at a grade level. We could look at district level. But again, we can't look at a student level because there's not enough items and they're not getting items on every target. So it's not designed to, again, be at a student level. We're thinking systems because we're talking about the summative. When we look at these reports, they help us in planning, whether that's our interventions, instructions, maybe how we want to use our interims, maybe our curriculum. Again, the target reports are helping us to make these decisions at those systems levels. So we have these symbols. You will see there's two example targets here. There's target 8 and target 9. For the purpose of this, doesn't really matter what those targets are. They're just kind of showing you two different targets. When I'm looking at target 8 and I'm looking at proficient, what those symbols tell me is whether or not that group, whatever the group is I'm looking at, maybe I'm looking at my whole school, maybe I'm looking at a classroom, but that proficient symbol is telling me how that group of students did relative to the cut scores. So this is all around the cut scores. It doesn't change. It is whether or not they were above proficient, at, near, or below. So as a group, did they score above that target and proficiency? Were they above the cut score? At, near, the reason we say at, near is because they are so close to the change from level 2 to level 3 that we are not able to definitively say, because of the standard error, that if they are at or below. So we say, or sorry, if they're above or below, that's why we say they're at or near. They could be just above, they could be just below, but with that standard error, we can't definitively say. And then the proficiency target symbol of an X tells me that my group of students were below proficient on that target as a whole. And so again, those are just related to proficiency. When we talk about the other column, the weaknesses and strengths, this is talking about the relative strengths and weaknesses of that particular group. So if I take I was a third grade teacher mostly, so if I take my third grade class and I think about these symbols, I'm going to get an average of how my students did overall on the assessment. Not related to proficient, just if we got an average of how my class did, they have X score. The plus sign tells me that that target was a strength for them because as a group, they performed better on that target than they did on the overall score for the assessment. The equal sign is telling me that they scored about the same on that target as they did on the overall test. And then the minus sign is telling me that that target was below how they performed on the overall test. So that's why we call it a relative strength or weakness. It doesn't have to do with proficiency and those cut scores. It has to do with how my students performed relative to themselves. As I mentioned, we are looking at a change in our system where those proficiency targets, instead of seeing symbols, you're going to see the word. So you'll see below, at, near, or above with a color associated with it. So we're just getting rid of some of those symbols. So it's not quite so lucky charmy feeling that you'll only see symbols in the weakness and strength column. And then the proficient will be the words. We'll kind of quickly go through interpreting these, but I wanted to show an example of this because these can be a little, especially those weak and strong. I know sometimes we need a visual to help us really solidify what that means. So if we're looking at our proficient symbols, this is our cut, right? So if the student had a score that was above this cut, then they are proficient. If they're right near it, they would be at near. And then if they're below it, they're below. So we're going to show an example here, target A, right? We have that gray bar of our standard error. They're anywhere within that range. Because we're below the proficiency cut, we would see an X for target A for this group of students. Target G, that standard error falls within the proficiency cut. So because that standard error does dip below that proficiency cut, we cannot say definitively if they are above or below. So we're going to say they're at near for that target. And then finally, target J, solidly above the proficiency cut. That standard error does not touch the proficiency cut. So we can definitively say that, yes, this target, my students were above proficient. Now looking at our strengths and weaknesses, we still have that proficiency cut, but that green bar is now showing how my students did overall. So again, my group of students, as an actual performance on the test, that's where they scored as a group. Target A, my standard error, is within that green bar because I'm looking at relative strengths to how they performed. So target A becomes an equal sign because their performance on target A was about the same as their performance on the overall assessment. Target G is above the green line, but still touching the red. But because it's above the green line, it's a relative strength. My students performed better on target G than they did on the overall assessment. Target J is a similar story. It's above the overall actual performance, so it's again another relative strength. If that standard error wasn't touching green and was below it, then we would see a minus sign. When we combine now our relative strengths with our proficiency, that's the columns that we get in our target reports. So target J was proficient and a strength, target G was at near proficient and a strength, target A was not proficient, but relative to how they performed on the rest of the test. You may see an asterisk, and that is because if not enough students got an item related to that target, our vendor is not going, the assessment can't say whether or not they are proficient or weak or strong. There's just not enough information to have a valid piece of information provided. And this is often the case, again, when we think about those supporting clusters, if students are only getting one item that connects to one of 4 targets, then if we have a small enough population of students, we're just not going to get the data we need. If you're looking at a school level or district level, chances of seeing an asterisk is not very great, but still could happen. But at classroom level, it's more likely that you might see that pop up from time to time. And so while the target report is great when looking at a snapshot of that academic year, what we really encourage is using the cross-sectional report, which looks at the trends of those target reports over multiple years. And this is looking at the same grade level over 3 years of time. So what that does is if I'm a 3rd grade teacher, I can say, you know what, for 3 years in a row, this particular target was an area of weakness for my students. That gives me a clue to, I need to look into that. As a school leader, that lets me know, hey, what's going on with 4th grade target D? Again, I just made that up randomly. Right, but it just gives me a place to go to say, I need to investigate this further. Is it a timing of when we teach it? Do we need to integrate it earlier on in the school year because we're not covering it until after we take the assessment? Is my curriculum just not doing the job I need it to reach the depth of what this standard is asking us to do, or this target is asking us to do? Do I need more interventions tied to this? Right? This is where we start to get at that systems level. When we're seeing a trend over time as it relates to these targets, you at the local level can start digging into your systems to say, is there something off? Do we need to make an adjustment to better support our students in reaching that proficiency mark? And so this is just being able to kind of call out one of those so you can see again, this is target A over 3 years of time. If I'm looking at target A, I see 3 at or near proficient. Typically, it's also a relative strength. And so I'm thinking, you know what, we're doing okay here. Of course, I want it to get into that proficient side. But this wouldn't be as big of a concern as, say, maybe target, I want to say that's, sorry, I had my videos in the way. Target F, where I'm seeing below proficient and about at near, or even target K, I see it as a weakness at one point. Right, so again, by pulling up this cross-sectional report and seeing these target trends over time, we're really able to start thinking about our systems and what we need to do to support students. It's also important to overlap that blueprint because if I notice that target J is a supporting cluster, I might not need to put as much emphasis on what I'm going to do to support that if it's just a supporting cluster. I do want to still acknowledge it, but if there's a target that's a priority cluster that needs more attention, right, that's a better place where I can go ahead and put in my information. I see a hand. If you have a question, if you could put it in the chat, I will get to it at the end. Thank you so much. This is just a reference slide for you all, where to go to find those target reports if you haven't seen them before. There are also some hidden slides on getting to those cross-sectional reports. So those are for reference for you all when this gets sent out. So there is this one, but there are others as well. Okay, so that was a lot about the summative. We're going to do a really brief, hey, how does interim assessments from the ISAT system connect here? Uh, this will be a reference, but do note that interim assessments have a little bit different of a security level. We talk about this a lot. There are ways to use interims in a non-standardized format. And so they don't always have to be used through the platform in order for students to engage with that content. So just want to make that note, but always come back here to kind of make sure you have a full understanding around that security level of the items. So we talked about this earlier. Interims help to make that connection around supporting our curriculum and the statewide assessment, right? The interims are connected to our summative assessment. They have the same targets, but they allow us to use them more throughout the year in a different format so we could check in on how we're doing and relate it to our instruction, to our curriculum more immediately. You're able to see student responses on an interim. So I can go in and give, say I know target A is a weakness for my group. I'm going to give them an interim on target A. Then I can look at their responses and say, okay, how do I want to adjust my instruction? Are there pieces of my curriculum that I could pull in to support this missing understanding, right? But that's how they can support one another by using those interims. So this is just a reference of what are the interims if you're not familiar with them. There are different lengths. A lot of times people are like, well, they're like the whole test. Well, we do have those. Those are the comprehensive ones, but we also have ones that are more targeted. And I think sometimes we don't always recognize that, or maybe we haven't done the best job at advertising that or working on it because they're great. They are able to target in on a more particular target instead of the whole comprehensive test. Because the comprehensive interims are the extended form of our test. It's not even matching our summative assessment because we use the shortened blueprint when it comes to the summative assessment, but the interims are used across our consortium and they are just the extended version. So students are seeing a longer version when they take that comprehensive interim than they're going to see on the summative assessment. That's why those smaller, more focused interims are really beneficial because it's just a snapshot or a piece of data that you're trying to gather around a particular content. And I'll leave this as just a reference. This is something we share as you're thinking about interims is, you know, what kind of data do I want? How am I going to use that data? It's going to inform what type of interim to give. Those target reports are a great place to go to determine what interims you want to give, because if I look at my trends over time and I identified targets that might need a little bit more attention, I can be intentional in giving some interims throughout the year that are going to connect to that so I know ahead of time how my adjustments are supporting student learning. Right. So as I just said, uh, these target trends are a great place to kind of identify those areas that you're going to want to give some interims to have some checkpoints throughout the year. Again, interims are one piece of that balanced assessment system. Those formative assessment practices are those day-to-day moves your teachers are doing to gather evidence of learning and give feedback in the moment. Interims aren't, they are more immediate than your summative, but they're still not as immediate as a formative assessment practice. So we're just calling out here how you can see where the priority clusters are on those target reports. And so I might assign interims that are connected to those targets at some point during the year when I'm teaching that content to see how my students are doing and what adjustments I might want to make. We do have a list of these interims that call out what targets and claims they're connected to, so you can easily go in and identify, hey, there it is, target E and F. I know that's an area I wanted to assess. I know what interim I'm going to give my students. So the assessment name is the interim name, and then it shows you what targets are connected to it. 'Cause not always clear. So this is a kind of cheat sheet, so you can go easily find what interims are there for your students. So that was the big rapid fire information around the summative ISAT with a little bit of interim there. Um, it's so much that we just tried our best to consolidate that into just about 40 minutes. There's way more that we could discuss, and I can't wait to look at some of these questions to answer them. But this is an ongoing conversation. If this is new information to you, if this opened your eyes about something, or if it's just something circling in your head that just still doesn't feel like it makes sense, please continue to reach out to us. This conversation is one that we want to continue to have with you to support the work you are doing with your students, your teachers. This is just kind of a high level overview, trying to give some information to get you to think about the purpose behind this particular assessment. Um, and so I do want to just pause to have a moment here to share our RFP. Again, that's a response for proposal. I didn't know that acronym until I joined the department. Because as a principal, I didn't need to know that. As a teacher, I definitely didn't need to know that. And so what that is how we at the government ask for vendors to propose a product or a service or whatever to us. So it's like a bid. They share, we put out, here's what we're looking for. We get really specific in the criteria of what we're looking for, what it's intended to do. And then vendors will give us a proposal that says, here is my product. Here is how it meets your all's needs. Here's how much it costs, right? It's this whole process for us to be able to select um, a vendor that we will then have a contract with to provide what we're looking for. So for the ISAT, we have three components, which I actually think I put on the next slide. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and so just as a reminder, this again, these are informations that I didn't even realize, right? We have a test delivery system, and that is through our vendor Cambium. We have our science summative assessment items that come from also Cambium. So we have that same vendor for two different parts of our summative assessment. And then our math and ELA items, which is delivered through our test delivery system, comes from Smarter Balanced. So this is why sometimes when we're like, why does this content have this, but this one doesn't? It's because they're different vendors. And so I just wanted to kind of call attention to that, that there are these different pieces that all go together to make up our system. And so we did pause. We had it out to get a new delivery system, but through the process, we just gathered some insights that we want to make it better. So we canceled it for now to re-release in the coming months with some enhancements to make sure it's the best product for you all. That was our ultimate goal. Is we want to really make sure it has the smoothest rollout to the field and just has a clear process for everyone. So we are excited to do this again and make it even better for you all for a new rollout in the future. So now we're at the questions, which my plan was 15 minutes and I did it. We have 15 minutes to get questions answered. I know people have been throwing them in the chat. I'm going to get to those first. If you have additional questions that are not in the chat, I will do my best to get to them. But if we reach towards the end and I haven't answered a question, throw it in the chat. And again, I'll make a Q&A document. And you might see my face twice because I'm looking on someone else's computer at the questions as I'm also talking off of mine. So if the ISAT isn't designed to evaluate individual students, then why are we printing these individual reports off and sending them home? It's a fantastic question. That is part of our federal requirements that we still are providing an, a snapshot of how students are doing. So while the inferences you can make are not necessarily student specific, it still gives us a snapshot on how they're doing towards those standards. And so we can speak broadly that, like, for ELA, this is how they are progressing towards that grade level standards. So that's why also, if you look at those reports closely, we say they may be able to, or they are demonstrating an ability to based on this assessment. So we're not saying definitively that they can do these things. We're saying based on this assessment, this is what we're able to infer. And so, yes, they're not designed for that student level instructional decision making, but it is part of the requirement to provide an update because they can show a broad ability level for each of those contents. So it's a great question. Um, Explain the difference between the different kinds of interim assessments. We did talk a little bit about that, so I'm not sure if that question came in before or after we talked about interims. Um, Sounds like maybe it came in after, right? So the different kinds of interim assessments, we have our interim are comprehensive. So that is if you wanted to take the almost replica assessment as the summative. It is longer again because it's the extended form, not the shortened form that we use on our summative. So our comprehensive is as if you're taking the summative assessment. It's just an interim that you can take as many times throughout the year. It'll give you an equivalent score to the summative. So you can compare those scores to see how they're doing. For math and ELA, we do have a shortened comprehensive interim. We call it the SICA. And what that is, it's just the computer adaptive portion. It's not the performance task portion. There is an interim block that is just the performance task. So if you are someone who just wants to do the writing performance task or the math performance task, there is an interim assessment block that's just that piece. So we took those two pieces away from the summative or the comprehensive and just made them two separate pieces as well. So you can either do it together as the comprehensive or as two separate pieces. Then you have your interim assessment blocks. They are a group of related targets. Typically, I think it's like 3 to 8 targets might be covered in a block. And then you have your focused interim blocks. And those are more specific down to like 1 to 3 targets. That's for math and ELA. For science, they're a little bit different. You have your comprehensive, and that one is computer adaptive. So all of the other interims are fixed form, meaning every time the student takes it, they're going to see the same items. The science comprehensive is the only one that adapts each time the student takes it. They then have testlets, which are similar to like an interim block, where it's a group of related disciplinary core ideas. Then they have standalones, which are like third grade items, fourth grade items, fifth grade items. So it's more grade level specific. And so if there's, okay. So those are the only two questions that were in the chat when Amber was monitoring it for me. I think I saw maybe a couple more hop in here. Let me go ahead and open up my chat. I got it. Thank you. Um, okay, I see. Yes, is for those of you who maybe hopped on later, this has been recorded. We are going to do some accessibility work with it to make sure that it's accessible. So when we send it out, it just might take a little time for us to get to make sure it is accessible. Yeah. Our question was that are on the interim assessments. Sorry, I'm going to read the question fully. Are the questions/problems that are on the interim assessments ones that were thrown out or are or rejected from the actual ISAT? Nope, they go through the same kind of process that our summative items go through in field testing, data validation, right? They are just designed, or not designed, but they are created for the intent of being used on an interim versus the summative, but they still go through the same rigorous process to ensure that they're solid questions to be used. Oop, I accidentally clicked to the end there. Any other questions? I know this was a ton of information. Please ask questions. You need to remember that. Yep, for the math and ELA, right? That comprehensive interim assessment. because it's modeling the summative, you do have to take both the CAT and the PT. Thanks, Peggy, for sharing that, right? That's something that I think we either have or are going to add a note when you go to assign that summative or that comprehensive interim, that it tells you, hey, remember, you do have to take both parts to get a score because it's a couple times this year we've had people reach out saying, hey, we only took one part. How do we get our scores? But there are, again, different interims if you just want to take one part or the other. So if you want to take the whole one, great. You have to take both parts. If you're just looking to do the CAT or just the PT, there are different interims that are just those pieces. The interim assessments, Josh, thank you for that question. The interim assessments are fixed form. Our summative assessment is computer adaptive for that portion, and then the performance task. It's a performance task, so it's not necessarily fixed form because students get different ones, but they're not all the same. So that's why it's not technically fixed form. But when I refer to the fixed forms, those are the interims. But yes, all of our math interim assessments are fixed formed. We have put in a request or a notice to our vendor saying, hey, we would love to see the SICAs have maybe be a computer adaptive or at least multiple forms because many times schools reach out saying, hey, we do this, especially in high school, we do this ninth, 10th, 11th grade to help prepare our students, but they see the same questions. So we're not actually sure if they're just memorizing the answers or if they're truly growing in their knowledge. And so that is something that they're aware of. We are part of a bigger consortium, and so it's just a little bit more time sometimes to get those changes that we would hope for, but they're aware that that's something I think just across the board of other states too would like to see more forms to those comprehensive ones. Yeah, great question around the targeted interims assessments. Most of those are scored through the system. Um, there are some math ones that are needing hand scoring. Um,
Visual items.
and it's just individual items. Um, and there's not many of those. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, Suzanne, which ones those are. Amber can maybe follow up with you, or you could reach out to Amber. She might be able to tell you. Um, but yes, most of them are scored through the system. A couple do need some hand scoring. And for any of them that are given a score for a constructed response, you could go in as the educator in an interim and change those scores if you feel like it wasn't representative. But the system does a pretty good job, and they might flag if they just don't think that they can provide an accurate score, and you might need to go do it as well. But typically, yeah, it's all scored through the system. And yes, we didn't cover a ton on interims. It was a very brief piece of this. The goal was really to discuss how the summative assessment plays into our systems at a school level. So as a school leader, this helps me to think around how do I prioritize the content that I want my staff to focus on. Um, when I'm looking at those target reports, it might also be what prior knowledge are they missing? Do I need to do some work in my younger grade levels that come before that to help support them when they get to this grade level? If my fifth grade students are struggling with multiplying fractions, I'm going to want to look at the previous grade levels to see, are they also showing weakness in fraction work, or is it just when we get to multiplying fractions? Right. So again, those target reports are designed to look at systems. You at the local level are going to dig deep to figure out how to make adjustments to better support students in reaching proficiency. The reports are just to show us that broad picture of where students are at. Any other questions I can answer? You have my contact. Oh, why is it not my? I thought I changed the contact information. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. If you would like to reach out to me specifically, you can reach out to the assessment and accountability one, but then it just gets forwarded to me. Um, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you need to hop off, have a wonderful day. Thank you for the work you do. I know how challenging it is and how rewarding it is. We are here to support you in the ways that's helpful. Like I said, this is just one piece of a broader assessment system, but it's an important piece. And so we want to make sure that you all feel supported and knowledgeable and have what you need to be able to use it intentionally and efficiently. So we are always here to support you all. So please reach out. This is my email and then my phone number. Oh, can I remember my phone number?
You need the last four. Help you.
I'm trying to remember the last four digits of my phone number. Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate you being here. That's what I thought. Thank you, Jim. And there's my phone number if you ever want to give me a call. Truly, the best part of the job is talking to you all and supporting you. So please use it. That's what we're here for. Um, I hope to potentially do more trainings like this or check-ins just to provide information that's helpful to you all. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your feedback. We will remain on. I will stop the recording at this point, but if you do want to remain on, if you have any other questions, happy to be here to answer them.